The clock ticked louder than usual in Class 9B, though nobody dared to complain. The walls of the classroom, once painted a cheerful cream, looked faded under the weight of fear. At the center of this suffocating atmosphere stood Ms. Rushmi Sharma, the strictest teacher in St. Augustine High. Her reputation was carved in whispers. She doesn't forgive. She doesn't forget. She humiliates. Even the boldest of students would shrink under her gaze, and those unlucky enough to falter in her subject, mathematics, were often reduced to trembling wrecks. But in the last row, pressed against the wall, sat Anaya's son, the girl most students barely noticed. She was the kind who entered classrooms like a shadow and left the same way. Her grades were decent, her voice barely above a whisper, and her presence often forgotten. Anaya didn't fight back when mocked, didn't raise her hand to answer, and never once tried to stand out. She was the girl who listened, observed, and hid behind the invisibility cloak of silence. Miss Sharma, however, had a sharp eye for weakness. And, to her, Anaya wasn't just invisible, she was a perfect target. Quiet students are the easiest to break, she had once muttered to a fellow teacher. That morning, she decided Anaya would be her victim. Son. Ms. Sharma's voice cracked like a whip, making half the class jump. Anaya looked up, startled, clutching the edge of her desk. Stand up. Slowly, Anaya rose, her knees wobbling. Her big brown eyes darted around the room. Nobody met her gaze. Her classmates looked down at their notebooks, relieved it wasn't their turn. Tell me, Ms. Sharma said, tapping the blackboard with a piece of chalk, if two trains leave different stations, one from Delhi at 7 a.m. at 60 kilometers per hour, and another from Agra at 8 a.m. at 80 kilometers per hour. When will they meet? The question, complex and layered, was the kind Ms. Sharma chose deliberately to humiliate. She expected hesitation, stammering, or silence. The silence would be her cue to sneer, to lecture the class about incompetence, to reinforce her authority. Anaya opened her mouth and then shut it. Speak up, girl. Miss Sharma snapped. Or is your tongue as slow as your brain? A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the class. Anaya's ears burned, but she said nothing. Miss Sharma smirked. Pathetic. The rest of you take notes. This is what happens when you hide in the back and pretend to study. Mediocrity at its finest. Her words cut deeper than knives. Anaya clenched her fists under the desk, forcing herself not to cry. She wanted to disappear, but something stirred inside her. A small flame. Anger, quiet but sharp. For months, she had endured humiliation in silence, convincing herself it was easier to stay unnoticed. But now, as the entire class watched her crumble under Ms. Sharma's cruel gaze, something inside her refused to bow. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her chin. The trains will meet at 10 a.m., she said softly, but firmly enough for the room to hear. A stunned silence fell. Ms. Sharma blinked. What did you say? 10 a.m. Anaya repeated, her voice steady now. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply stated it as a fact, her eyes locked on the teachers. The class shifted uneasily. They had never heard Anaya speak more than 2 words in a row, let alone challenge Ms. Sharma. Ms. Sharma's smirk faltered. And how, pray, did you arrive at that conclusion? She asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Anaya stepped forward. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. She walked to the blackboard, gently took the chalk from Ms. Sharma's hand, and began to explain. Line by line, she broke down the problem. Her handwriting was neat, her logic precise. She calculated the distance, the speed, the time, every step crisp and clear. Within minutes, the solution stood proudly on the board. Therefore, Anaya concluded, turning back to face the stunned class, the trains will meet at 10 a.m. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Miss Sharma's face drained of color. She had expected hesitation, failure, an easy victory. Instead, she had been cornered, outsmarted by the very girl she had mocked. A slow, hushed whisper spread across the class. She's right. Perfect calculation. Did you see that? Anaya stood, chalk dust on her fingers, her chest rising and falling. For once, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the quiet shadow hiding in the back row. She was the storm no one saw coming. Miss Sharma opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Her authority, built on fear, had cracked in front of 30 witnesses. And as Anaya walked back to her seat, her classmates' eyes followed her, not with pity, but with something new: respect. For the first time, Anaya allowed herself the faintest smile. The quiet girl had spoken, and nothing in that classroom would ever be the same again. The bell rang for recess, but nobody rushed out of Class 9B. The air was heavy, charged with something new, an unfamiliar crack in the old order. Students whispered in clusters, their eyes darting between Anaya and the door through which Miss Sharma had stormed out only moments earlier. "Did you see her face?" whispered Ria, the class chatterbox, stifling laughter. "She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon," giggled Arjun, still replaying the scene in his mind. And Anaya, a boy, leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Man, where was she hiding all that?" Anaya sat quietly at her desk, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the scratched wood. Her classmates' admiration washed over her in hushed voices. But she didn't raise her head. She wasn't used to this spotlight. It felt too bright, too heavy. Still, somewhere inside her, a small part of her glowed. But for Ms. Sharma, the moment had been nothing short of humiliating. She paced furiously in the staff room, her heels clicking against the tiled floor like a ticking bomb. "That girl," she muttered, slamming her books on the table, "that insolent girl dared to embarrass me in front of the entire class. Rush me." "Calm down," said Mr. Dutta, the history teacher, sipping his tea. "She only answered a question correctly. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," Miss Sharma snapped, "is that she took my chalk walk to my board and made me look like a fool. If I don't crush this behavior now, every student will think they can defy me." Her colleagues exchanged wary glances. Everyone knew Ms. Sharma's pride was her fortress. Once breached, she became vengeful. By the time she returned to class, her smile was fixed but cold. Her eyes swept across the students until they landed on Anaya, who immediately lowered her gaze. "Children," Miss Sharma said smoothly, "I must congratulate Anaya for her little performance earlier." She emphasized the word like venom. "It seems she has hidden talents after all." A few students chuckled, nervously. "But talent," Miss Sharma continued, her tone sharpening, "is useless without discipline. Let's see if Anaya can solve something a little more challenging." She wrote a monstrous equation on the board, layers of algebra, trigonometry, and geometry twisted together into a beast designed not for testing, but for destroying confidence. The class murmured, "That's too much. Even we haven't learned all that yet." "Quiet." Ms. Sharma barked. She turned, her eyes glittering. "Anaya, solid. Now." Anaya froze. Her pulse quickened. The equation wasn't from their syllabus, it was an ambush. She could feel 30 pairs of eyes on her waiting. Her first instinct was to retreat, to shrink back into silence, to let Ms. Sharma win. But then she remembered the earlier moment, the chalk in her hand, the hush in the room when she had spoken, the respect she had glimpsed. Her fear clashed with a rising defiance. She rose slowly, walked to the board again, and picked up the chalk. Ms. Sharma folded her arms, smirking. "Go on, genius. Show us." For a moment, Anaya just stared at the problem. The numbers swam before her eyes, the symbols forming a tangled jungle. Her palms grew clammy. But then a voice inside whispered, "Don't solve the problem. Solve her." Anaya turned back to the teacher. "Ma'am, with respect, this question isn't from our syllabus." The class gasped. No one had ever dared point that out to Ms. Sharma. Her jaw tightened. "Are you questioning me?" "No." Anaya said, calmly meeting her gaze. "I'm only stating a fact. If you want to test my intelligence, give me a problem that's relevant to what you've taught. Otherwise, it's not a test, it's a trap." The silence was electric. Students exchanged wide-eyed looks, struggling not to gasp aloud. Ms. Sharma's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, but for once, words betrayed her. The girl was right. If she insisted, the other teachers, and maybe even the principal, would hear of her unfairness. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Then, suddenly, the bell rang, signaling the end of the period. The class exhaled. In unison, Anaya placed the chalk back on the ledge, turned, and walked to her seat with quiet dignity. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat, but her silence was louder than any triumph. The class erupted the moment Ms. Sharma left. Did you hear her? She called her out. Anaya's a legend now. But Anaya didn't celebrate. She sat quietly, her face neutral. Inside, though, her heart thundered. She had just crossed a line, one she could never step back from. And she knew Ms. Sharma wouldn't forget. That night, Anaya sat at her small desk in her modest home, books spread out before her. Her mother peeked in, smiling softly. Studying late again? Anaya looked up, hesitating. Should she tell her mother what happened? The humiliation, the confrontation, the dangerous pride of her teacher? No. She simply smiled and said, "Yes, Ma, just a little extra practice." But deep inside, she knew tomorrow wouldn't be easy. Miss Sharma would strike again, harder. And this time, the storm wouldn't be silent. The week that followed felt like walking on a tightrope for Anaya. Every time she entered the classroom, she felt the weight of Ms. Sharma's gaze boring into her back. The teacher's smile was still sharp, but behind it lurked something darker, a wound covered in pride, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The class had changed, too, where once Anaya blended into shadows. Now whispers followed her like ripples in water. That's her, Anaya. She shut Miss Sharma down twice. She's smarter than she lets on. The attention was strange, almost uncomfortable. Anaya didn't know how to handle the sudden spotlight. She kept her head down, answered only when asked, and avoided being pulled into gossip. But her classmates' eyes gleamed with curiosity, admiration, even hope. It was as if her quiet defiance had given them courage, too. For Miss Sharma, however, the change was intolerable. Students whispering her authority questioned, her humiliation replayed in their hushed conversations. It was poison to her pride. And so, she devised a plan. 2 weeks later, the principal announced the annual interschool mathematics quiz. It was one of the biggest academic events of the year, with schools competing for a trophy that brought not just prestige, but also scholarships for the winners. The hall would be packed with teachers, students, and even local reporters. Ms. Sharma immediately seized the opportunity. She strode into class, her sari pleats perfectly in place, her expression calm, but her eyes glittering. Good news, children. Our school has been invited to participate in the interschool quiz. And guess what? She let the pause linger, her smile curving. One of you will represent us. The class buzzed with excitement. Hands shot up. Me, ma'am. I want to try. But Miss Sharma's gaze slid past them all and landed squarely on Anaya. No need to volunteer. I've already chosen. Anaya's son will represent us. The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, a few groans. What? Anaya? She's perfect for it. She's too quiet. What if she freezes? Anaya's heart stopped. Represent the school? In front of a hall full of strangers? Her throat tightened. Public speaking was her greatest fear. She could solve problems on paper, yes, but standing on stage, under the glare of hundreds of eyes, it was her nightmare. She stood slowly. Ma'am, with respect, maybe someone else. Miss Sharma's smile cut her off. No excuses, Anaya. You've already proven your talents. Or was it all just luck? Surely, you won't embarrass us on stage. The class fell silent, understanding the trap. If Anaya refused, she'd be branded a coward. If she agreed, she risked failing under pressure and giving Miss Sharma the sweet revenge she craved. Anaya swallowed hard. Her palms trembled. But then she remembered the feeling, chalk in hand, the hush of the class, the weight of respect. She couldn't let that vanish. I'll do it, she said quietly, though her chest was pounding. Preparation for the quiz began immediately. Ms. Sharma assigned herself as Anaya's mentor, though it felt more like an interrogation than training. She bombarded her with advanced problems, complex theorems, and trick questions, each more brutal than the last. Wrong again, Ms. Sharma would snap if Anaya hesitated. "You'll embarrass me if you answer like that. Speak louder. No one will hear that squeaky voice." Anaya pushed through, burning midnight oil, scribbling equations until her wrist ached. Her mother grew worried. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Beta," she said, gently massaging Anaya's shoulders one night. "I have to, Ma," Anaya whispered, her eyes burning with determination. "I can't let her win." The day of the quiz arrived. The school auditorium thrummed with anticipation. Students from rival schools sat in neat rows, their uniforms crisp. Teachers whispered in corners, their eyes flicking to the stage where the contestants would soon stand. Anaya's stomach twisted as she adjusted her blazer. Her hands were cold, her breath shallow. She scanned the crowd, spotting her classmates waving nervously at her, mouthing, "You can do it." And then she saw Ms. Sharma in the front row, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp as blades. The quiz began. The first few rounds were simple, basic arithmetic, general knowledge. Anaya answered carefully, her voice barely above the microphone, but correct every time. Her classmates cheered quietly, relief flickering in their eyes. But as the rounds advanced, the questions grew harder. Complex puzzles, riddles, rapid-fire calculations. The pressure mounted. Rivals stumbled, some breaking into nervous laughter, others biting their lips. Then came the final round, the deciding moment. The moderator announced, "This will be a one-on-one challenge. A single mistake can cost your team the trophy." Anaya's opponent, a confident boy from St. Xavier's, smirked as he cracked his knuckles. The question was read aloud, a brutal, multi-layered problem combining algebra, probability, and logic. The audience murmured. It was the kind of question that could break even the best. Anaya's head spun as she scribbled furiously on the provided sheet. Numbers blurred. Time ticked like a drumbeat. Fear clawed at her chest. What if I fail? What if she was right about me? She risked a glance at Ms. Sharma. Her teacher's eyes were locked on her, waiting hungry. Not for victory, for collapse. And in that moment, something inside Anaya snapped. Not with fear, but with clarity. She took a deep breath. She remembered every late night, every scribbled equation, every humiliation that had forged her steel. The quiet girl inside her was gone. What remained was fire. She stood up, gripped the microphone, and explained the solution step by step. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each sentence carrying across the hall. The audience leaned in spellbound. The rival contestant faltered, his paper blank. Finally, Anaya delivered the answer, clear, confident, flawless. A beat of silence. Then the moderator smiled. Correct. The auditorium erupted in applause. Cheers thundered. Her classmates jumped to their feet, clapping, shouting her name. And as Anaya looked down, she saw Ms. Sharma's face. Pale, frozen. For the second time, the quiet girl had turned her teacher's sneer into silence. The trophy gleamed under the stage lights, heavy with pride and glory. Students from St. Augustine roared with celebration as the principal handed it to Anaya, her teammates clapping her back. For a moment, she allowed herself to smile, just a small, trembling smile, but one that came from the deepest part of her heart. The principal beamed. "We are proud of you, Anaya. Today you didn't just win a quiz, you showed us courage, intelligence, and leadership." Applause filled the auditorium. And for once, Anaya stood tall, soaking in the thunder of recognition. But in the front row, Ms. Sharma sat motionless. Her lips curved in what should have been a smile, but her clenched jaw betrayed her fury. Every clap was a slap, every cheer a reminder of her shattered authority. She couldn't let this be the ending, not when her reputation was at stake. Back in class the next day, Ms. Sharma walked in with unusual calm. The students were still buzzing from yesterday's victory, the glow of triumph fresh on their faces. "Settle down," she said, her tone smooth. Before we begin, let us acknowledge Anaya for her achievement. The class broke into applause again, some even whistling. Anaya's cheeks flushed pink as she lowered her gaze. Miss Sharma waited for silence, then added, however, the words sliced through the room like ice. I must remind you all that competitions are one thing, but discipline and humility are another. A single victory doesn't erase years of mediocrity, nor does it give anyone the right to disrespect their teachers. The room went still. The applause died midair. The students glanced nervously at Anaya, who sat frozen. Miss Sharma continued, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut. Anaya may have performed well yesterday, but I fear her sudden confidence may be misinterpreted as arrogance. Do not mistake rebellion for brilliance, children. A few students shifted uncomfortably. The trap was set. Miss Sharma was poisoning the respect Anaya had earned, twisting admiration into doubt. Ria, the chatterbox, raised her hand timidly. But ma'am, she wasn't arrogant. Quiet. Ms. Sharma snapped. I will not entertain blind hero worship. Respect must be earned consistently, not by one flashy display. Her words hung heavy in the air. The class that had been alive with pride only moments earlier now sat subdued, their loyalty torn between admiration for Anaya and fear of their teacher. Anaya felt the sting. Every word was a dagger, aimed not just at her, but at the fragile respect she had just begun to hold. The old Anaya, the quiet shadow, would have stayed silent, bowed her head, and accepted the wound. But not anymore. Slowly she stood. The room seemed to tilt as 30 pairs of eyes turned to her. Her heart hammered, but her voice, steady, calm, cut through the silence. Ma'am, she said, with respect, winning yesterday wasn't about arrogance. It was about hard work. I studied every night not to disrespect you, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could. Miss Sharma's eyes narrowed. And you think standing up to me now makes you wise? No, Anaya said firmly, her voice rising just enough to carry. It makes me honest. You've always told us that success is about discipline. But discipline isn't just obedience, it's also the courage to stand for truth. And the truth is, you tried to break me. Twice. And still I stood. The class gasped. Never in their lives had they seen a student speak to Ms. Sharma like this, not with anger, but with a calm fire that made every word ring true. Yesterday, Anaya continued, her eyes sweeping the class, wasn't just my victory. It was ours. Because every one of us has felt small at some point. Every one of us has been afraid of making mistakes. But we don't have to stay small. We don't have to stay silent. The words fell like sparks onto dry grass. Heads lifted, eyes widened. The students straightened in their seats, something igniting in them. Miss Sharma's face turned crimson. Enough. Sit down this instant. But the tide had turned. Ria raised her voice. She's right, ma'am. We're not afraid anymore. Arjun chimed in louder this time. Respect doesn't come from fear. It comes from guidance. One by one, voices rose, not in rebellion, but in unity. We stand with Anaya. She's not arrogant, she's brave. We want teachers who inspire, not scare. The class that had once cowered under Ms. Sharma's rule now stood together, their silence shattered forever. Ms. Sharma trembled, her authority slipping through her fingers like sand. She opened her mouth to regain control, but no words came. For the first time, her voice, the weapon she had wielded for years, failed her. And Anaya, standing amidst the storm she had awakened, looked directly at her teacher. Respect isn't something you can demand, ma'am. It's something you earn. And today, I think you've lost it. The words landed like thunder. The bell rang. The students rose, their energy electric, their eyes burning with newfound courage. They didn't rush out, didn't chatter. They walked with quiet dignity, leaving Ms. Sharma standing alone in the wreckage of her pride. And for the first time in her career, the strictest teacher of St. Augustine High looked small. The following days at St. Augustine High carried a strange, electric energy. The students of Class 9 bewalked a little taller, their whispers louder, their laughter freer. It was as if a cage had cracked, and inside, courage had finally stretched its wings. And at the center of it all was Anaya's senator. No longer was she the silent shadow hiding in the back row. Now, students sought her out, asking questions, offering smiles, even saving her a spot at lunch. Some came to her shyly with doubts in math, and she patiently explained, her voice still soft but sure. Others simply wanted to sit near her, as though her quiet strength could rub off on them. But for Ms. Sharma, the air was suffocating. The staff room buzzed with murmurs. "Did you hear what happened in 9B? The children spoke against her. They say Anaya silenced her twice. The fortress of fear Ms. Sharma had built over years was crumbling, and no one rushed to defend it. Her colleagues, long aware of her cruelty, now smirked quietly when she passed. The students, once trembling at her footsteps, now looked her in the eye. For the first time, she felt powerless. One morning, the principal summoned Ms. Sharma to his office. Anaya was there too, sitting quietly in the corner. "Rashmi," the principal began, his tone calm but firm, "I've received reports about certain incidents in your class. It seems your methods of discipline have been questioned." Ms. Sharma stiffened. "Sir, with respect, children these days lack discipline. They mistake strictness for cruelty. If we let them walk over us," the principal raised a hand. "Enough. I saw Anaya at the quiz. I saw the confidence she displayed, the clarity of her explanation. That's not arrogance. That's brilliance. And brilliance must be nurtured, not crushed." Miss Sharma's face paled. The principal turned to Anaya. "Child, you've done us proud. But more importantly, you've reminded us of something vital. That education is about encouragement, not intimidation. You've taught not just your classmates, but us teachers as well." Anaya's cheeks warmed, but she only bowed her head respectfully. The principal's gaze returned to Ms. Sharma. "You will reflect on your methods, Rashmi. Change is needed. If you cannot inspire, then perhaps you should not teach." The words hit like stones. For the first time in her career, Ms. Sharma had been openly rebuked. That afternoon, Ms. Sharma returned to class. The students froze, bracing themselves. Anaya sat quietly, her notebook open, waiting. The teacher's steps were slower now, her voice lower. She looked around the room at the faces she had once ruled with fear, and something inside her cracked. She set her books down and, after a long silence, spoke. "Children," she began, her tone lacking its usual steel, "I may have been too harsh. Perhaps I believed that fear was the only way to bring out your best. But yesterday I saw something else. Respect, courage, unity. And it did not come from fear, it came from you." The class shifted, startled. Was this really Ms. Sharma? She looked at Anaya. For a moment, her eyes softened, though pride still lingered like a shadow. "Anaya, you proved me wrong. And maybe I needed to be proven wrong." Gasps rippled through the class. Ms. Sharma apologizing? It was unthinkable. Anaya met her gaze steadily. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She only nodded, as if to say lesson learned, on both sides. Weeks passed, and life at St. Augustine's settled into a new rhythm. Ms. Sharma was still strict. She couldn't change overnight, but her edge had dulled. She no longer mocked mistakes, no longer sneered at silence. Instead, she began asking who will try, instead of who will fail. The students responded in kind. Their hands rose higher, their answers bolder. The classroom, once heavy with fear, now thrummed with energy. And Anaya? She no longer sat in the last row. Her classmates often pulled her forward, insisting she take the front. She didn't resist anymore. She had discovered something that could never be taken back, her voice. One evening, walking home with her mother, Anaya paused outside the school gates. The setting sun painted the sky orange. The air filled with the chatter of children. Her mother looked at her curiously. "What's on your mind, Beta?" Anaya smiled faintly, her eyes thoughtful. "For so long, Ma, I thought being quiet made me weak. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to speak. And when you do, it can change everything." Her mother's eyes glistened with pride. She squeezed Anaya's hand. "You've always had that strength, my child. You just had to believe it." Anaya glanced back at the school building, tall and unyielding against the sunset. Once it had felt like a cage. Now it felt like a battlefield she had conquered. The quiet girl was quiet no longer. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning.